by command of General Robert E. Lee, R.H. Chilton, Assistant Adjutant General. So these orders were written by his assistant, R.H. Chilton, and that will come into play in a few moments. So we know these orders were written. Copies were sent out to all the generals listed on here. And how did these orders get lost, and how did they end up in the hands of General George McClellan? Well, we're not exactly sure how they got lost. I'm told by the good folks over at the Visitor Center here that research is ongoing and that there may be a new book, maybe already be out or coming out soon, about how the orders actually did get lost. But regardless, they got left behind. When General Lee's army pulled out of here on the morning of the 10th, heading west, the Union Army started to make its way in. And on the morning of September 13th, this much we do know. 4 soldiers, 2 privates, a corporal, and a sergeant from Company F of the 27th Indiana sat down underneath a large tree for some shade and rest somewhere on the Best Farm. Again, that area where they sat is kind of lost to history because the Best Farm was almost 800 acres at the time of the battle. Now it's only about 200 preserved here. Let me tell you who they were. Let me give you the names here. The 2 privates were John Campbell and David Vance, along with Corporal Barton Mitchell and Sergeant John Bloss, B-L-O-S-S. And so they're sitting under the tree, they're kind of resting, and Corporal Mitchell notices a yellow envelope. Gets his curiosity going, he reaches over and he opens it up. And to their surprise, they find a few cigars and some paper. Now, there's conflicting accounts. Most accounts I read said there was 3 cigars, booked by Priest. I'll mention it later as part of the sources I use. He says there was only 2 cigars, although apparently Corporal Mitchell got to enjoy one of those cigars. But the real prize to Army headquarters was not the cigars, but the paperwork inside. And inside that envelope contained Special Order 191, addressed to General Daniel Harvey Hill, or D.H. Hill for short. And let me explain to you how this made it up the chain of command from just a few enlisted men all the way up to the commanding general. Corporal Mitchell hands it over to Sergeant Bloss. Sergeant Bloss then takes it to their captain, Captain Kopp, K-O-P-P, and Sergeant Bloss was escorted to their colonel, Colonel Silas Colgrove. And at that time, while he was reading it, General Nathan Kimball, who just happened to be a relative by marriage of Sergeant Bloss, took a look at it, examined it, and then Kimball and Colgrove then went to General Alpheus Williams, who was their division commander. Williams was absent at the time that they arrived at his headquarters, but they did meet with Williams' acting Adjutant General, Captain Samuel Pittman. Now this is where we can authenticate 191 as at least being written by the person who claimed to write it. See, Pittman was a paymaster before the war, and he knew Lee's adjutant, R.H. Chilton, and he knew his handwriting. And Pittman was able to authenticate that the handwriting on the order was that of Chilton. So at least they were able to authenticate that what was written on the paper was written by R.H. Chilton. Now, as these men are examining this paper, General Williams rides up and he takes a look at the order and hears that they can verify that it was written by the person claimed who have written it. Williams takes the order to General McClellan himself. Even though the House really didn't play a role in losing or finding Special Order 191, let's just take a little ride over there so we can look at the house itself, and I include this episode there. I'm now standing in front of the best house here on the Monocacy battlefield. It was not used by either General Lee or General McClellan as a headquarters during the Antietam campaign. I just wanted to bring you on over and show you this very nice house. And peeking through the windows, I could see that they're undergoing some preservation work inside, and that's great. That means it's going to be here for future generations of America to come and enjoy. So the Lost Order made it up the chain of command pretty quickly, and by noontime, General McClellan had a copy of the orders in his hands, and he threw his hands up in the air and said, "Now I know what to do." And by 3 o'clock that day, he set the Army of the Potomac's cavalry in motion after the Army of Northern Virginia. Later that evening, he was bragging about the find to General John Gibbon, and he had this to say: "Here is the paper with which, if I cannot whip Bobby Lee, I will be willing to go home," quote unquote. I had the privilege years ago of talking with Stephen Sears on the phone, author Stephen Sears, and I asked him, how did McClellan come up with these inflated numbers of 120 to 150,000 men during the Antietam campaign, to which I really got probably the best answer I'll ever going to get to that question from author Sears himself, and that even though it says division command, McClellan would have had to elevate Longstreet and Jackson to that of a wing commander, and all of the people, all the generals mentioned as division commanders, would have had to have been elevated to that of corps command, and that's about the only way you can come up with the figure of 120 to 150,000 men if all of Lee's division commanders suddenly became corps commanders with multiple divisions underneath them. The main sources I use to bring this episode to you, and I highly recommend them all. Before Antietam, The Battle for South Mountain by John Michael Priest. Crossroads of Freedom, Antietam, The Battle That Changed the Course of the Civil War by author James McPherson. And, as I just mentioned his name, Landscaped Turn Red, The Battle of Antietam by Stephen W. Sears. For Civil War Reports, I am your War of the Rebellion reporter, Brian Thomas Kopak. Until next time, thank you for watching. And if you like what you saw today, please hit the subscribe button. Give a thumbs up. Also, notify your friends. Let them know about this channel and ask them to subscribe as well. If you like, you may leave a question or a comment below, and perhaps I will answer your question in a future episode of Civil War Reports. Until next time, please keep the history alive.